I'm Staff Sergeant Eric Stewart with the Edmonton Police Service Guns and Gangs section. We brought you here today to speak about the multiple shooting events our officers have responded to since August 28th. As outlined in our media release, EPS has responded to 10 shootings in a 10-day period, including 5 over the September long weekend. 8 of these shootings involved serious and, in some cases, life-threatening injuries. Given several of the incidents took place in very public locations, such as restaurants and roadways, the public safety risk was significant, and we are thankful we are not gathered here today to speak about lives lost. While I cannot comment on the individual circumstances of each incident, I can confirm that we continue to actively investigate all 10 shootings, and charges are currently pending in one of the events that took place near White Avenue. At this time, we believe all shootings were targeted events, and we continue to investigate if any of them were linked to one another. What I'd like to stress today is impact this level of concentrated violent events has on police resources. With 5 shootings in less than 48 hours, public safety was considerable concern and severely stretched our resources. Aside from these shootings, our officers also continued to respond to other calls, including violent incidents such as assaults and stabbings. While we're able to adjust accordingly by calling in officers from other areas, maintaining adequate service levels and response times becomes difficult under these circumstances and impacts the many other calls for assistance we receive from citizens. Like many jurisdictions across Canada and North America, the EPS continued to note a steady or increasing trend of calls involving firearms. Over the above, the large number of resources that are often required to respond to these firearm calls, follow-up investigations also prove lengthy and can tie up officers across the service. In fact, so far this year, the EPS has responded to 105 shooting events, of which 53% resulted in injury, 63% had the potential for innocent bystanders to be injured. As of Wednesday, August 31st, 2022, our members seized 452 firearms. 452 guns means we took almost 2 firearms off the street every day this year. Lastly, I want to recognize the work this past weekend by our frontline patrol members, EMS, nurses, and doctors in the hospitals. Some of these victims were located with life-threatening injuries, and it's because of the work of these individuals we aren't speaking about more tragic events today. I'll now open the floor to questions.
Yeah, Staff Sergeant, I guess I'm just curious, why did EPS feel the need to come out here and talk about these shootings? And I guess what did you want the public to know about this?
I think it's important for the public to understand what's going on in their community, first of all. When those events took place on White Ave, very public setting, lots of people out and about, we received a lot of calls about those events. And I think it's also for us to be transparent on what's happening in our community when it comes to these shooting events. We have a high number of shooting events, but this is a trend that we've seen the last 3 years here in Edmonton. I think it's important that we get the proper information out to everybody.
Calgary has had a real problem very recently with the amount of shootings they're dealing with. And did you assume that some of that would come up to Edmonton? Is there a link there? Are you seeing anything like that?
I wouldn't say there's a link. I would say we have our own isolated issues. For sure, individuals involved in criminal activity, shootings, they move around, not only inside the province, but outside across Canada. So Calgary has their own isolated incidents, I would say. We have our own here in Edmonton, similar to Winnipeg or out in the Lower Mainland. So we're on par with Calgary with our type of shooting events that we have here. I just think because last year compared to this year with Calgary, they had more of a spike than we did. It's become more of a news topic down there.
So no real link between?
No real link, no.
Obviously the investigations are all still ongoing, but I know the news release said yesterday these were targeted shootings, or some of them were. Can you speak a little bit to that at all, or that angle of it?
Yeah, I can't get into the weeds on the types of investigations because they are ongoing. But what I can say is that when an individual comes out and fires a firearm to a group of people or at an individual, we call that targeted, whether it be at a house, a vehicle. And we're not seeing these being accidental shootings. These are individuals that consciously take a firearm out with them that day or night, and they're out targeting individuals and shooting at individuals. So when we say targeted, none of these are accidental.
Could that be like road rage or something, or would that be obviously gangland or gang related or drug related or something like that?
We don't have road rage incidents when it comes to shootings. When I say by targeted, known groups, known individuals. What brought them to that event, we're not 100% sure. Those are still under investigation, a lot of these. But these individuals are involved in criminal activity, which could lead to all different types of activity. But they're definitely targeting each other out there.
Is there something happening with drug pricing or drug supply right now that is the catalyst for some of this?
No, I wouldn't say it's drug activity is a common reason, I guess, that we see gun violence out there. That's been ongoing for years. We do have we see more firearms on our streets in these groups. For sure, there's no doubt that the drug activity within these groups is causing some of this violence, but that's not the only reason why.
Okay, so what's the major reason why?
Well, we don't have I would say our finger on the pulse to know exactly what's going on, but what we do see is we're not calling this gang violence. What we see is a lot of groups coming together, forming groups, getting involved in criminal activity, and that may be for many reasons. That could be for violence, drugs, frauds, you name it. But when they come together, they feel the need to, we're seeing they're feeling the need to protect themselves by having firearms on them. And when they leave that house with a firearm on their possession, we're seeing them more actively using these firearms. So what's the actual roots of what's causing it? It's case by case. It's not a broad problem that we're seeing. So each individual investigation has its own merits to why this is happening.
It sounds like it's like clique violence or something that precludes it from being gang violence, as you said?
Well, I know in the past, we used to have our organized gangs. I'm talking back in the late 90s and 2000s. We've seen a different trend here in Edmonton. We don't have the identified gangs so much. I call them groups, criminal networks, whatever you want to call them. But again, they come together for a common purpose, again, criminal activity. And amongst that is we're seeing these groups collide in some way or amongst their own groups and this violence occurring. But they're interrupted by the police or by their own violence with murders and other violent offenses that makes them disperse after. So they come together for an event, whatever that might be. I say one event, drug activity, criminal activity, and then they're interrupted by the police and then they go away. So we have these groups emerging and then they go away. These groups come back and they go away. So it's not like it's a common gang happening out there. So it is difficult for the police to get their finger on some of this, but we can't target just groups out there. Like I'm talking known gangs that we used to have or other cities might have. We have to get ahead of it in different ways by being proactive.
So, sorry, I'll just add to that. I think on top of the gang issues or drug or those sorts of issues.
Sir, can you come up to the podium?
Yeah. I'll just on top of what Eric said, I think just across Canada, across North America, there's a higher propensity for violence. There's more people carrying edged weapons, bear spray, firearms, and when people are carrying those and somebody crosses them, whatever it is, there's opportunity, and a lot of times these are impulsive reactions to someone who is angry at another person, so they resort to what they have on their person. With more people carrying firearms, this leads to more opportunity for shooting events to occur. So to say all of these are confined to drug or gang activity, I think would be erroneous. I think this just speaks to the greater propensity for violence in communities across North America right now, and with access to weapons, that leads to kind of these impulsive, although targeted, but they're relatively impulsive reactions out in the community.
So why is there a greater propensity for violence now? Like in your investigations or your studies, why is that happening now?
That's a really good question, and I don't know if I have a great answer to it, other than I think just people are arming themselves like they didn't used to, whether it's firearms, knives or bear spray or what have you. And there's more of a willingness to use that than there has been in the past. So I think the combination of that contributes to the increased propensity for violence that we're seeing in communities.
This recent White Avenue shooting, is that itself fitting a bit of a trend that we're seeing in White Avenue as well?
I don't know. We've had a couple incidents on White Ave, but I would say what we're seeing is a lot of these. Well, this year in particular, I wouldn't say we see trends every year when it comes to these shootings, but what we're seeing this year is these shooting events are occurring more during the time. Typically you would see these things happen during the nighttime mostly. Now we're seeing a trend where it happens like between 6 in the morning and noon. We have the stuff that happened at nighttime on White Ave. We have stuff that happens on Jasper Ave, some of these busy areas. But we are seeing more public areas where there's more people around where these shootings are happening. So there is that where, what's concerning to us that these individuals aren't thinking when they pull that trigger what's beyond their target and what they're looking at doing, because those rounds fly over the city and they're hitting homes, cars, and innocent people sometimes, right? So to say it's just White Ave, no, I would say that's kind of we haven't seen a lot on White Ave, but definitely it was concerning on the weekend.
So are you coming forward today to say that you have a handle on this, or you don't have a handle on it, or something other?
Well, I can say that we are aware. We have a lot of, so these investigations are very resource intensive. So we have investigative response teams that usually are the forefront of the investigative teams that take on these shootings. So we can say that we know for the most part in every file who our suspects are in these files. Doesn't mean we get to a charge right away. These are very complex investigations. We're aware of what's going on. We're aware of these emerging groups. We have our gang suppression team that's part of Organized Crime Branch. They proactively go out and have focused deterrence on this type of violent behavior. So we go out and this team goes out and they proactively look at these groups and individuals who have a propensity to attract violence or be involved in violence. And so that team's engaged on a lot of this as well. In relation to the investigations, like they're resource heavy, they're intense, they take a long time. It's about putting the puzzle pieces together. So, we're doing the best that we can. I think we have a good handle on what's going on out there. It's just these hot spots pop up and then we got to respond to them. So,
other than just awareness, what do you want members of the public to take away from this?
well, the one thing I would ask and I would hope that we could get from the public is just, we can only do so much as the police. We need the public's help in solving these investigations. And that could be something as a witness to one of the events. You're a complainant to one of these events. I don't want to say all the time, but it's sometimes hard to get cooperation through those channels. We need that cooperation on these files. We can't just do it on our own all the time. And there's usually somebody that has seen something. You're a victim to a crime like this. You know what has happened. There's a tendency for these individuals to hesitate to come forward to talk to us. We want to change that. We want to be able to have people come forward, tell us what's going on in their communities, tell us if they see something, so we can then react and deal with it accordingly. We need the help from the community.
Any final questions?
You mentioned these trends and I guess the increase over the weekend and everything like that. Is there anything police are doing like action-wise, anything new, any actions that police are taking to kind of combat these trends in the present?
Well, they did have an incident down on White Ave. We can't say it relates to a certain establishment, but we have our beat officers in those areas that, they patrol those areas all the time. We have officers out there. We have our gang suppression team that goes out to certain locations. We have a police presence in these locations, but you look at the ones in the north end at the YMCA and the other, like, we have to respond. We can't have police officers there all the time, right? So we're doing our best to, if there is an emerging location or hotspot, we will deploy resources appropriately to those areas to deal with those. It's just like we said, it's not like we have this gang and that gang and it's a turf war and we can set up in those areas. It's kind of all over the city. So we're doing the best that we can to do that.
And I guess just the one pending charge so far, and nothing else you can report, I guess, charge-wise?
That's right. On one of the events on the weekend, there's pending charges on a male suspect. And that investigation is still ongoing.
Anything else to add? Anything else to add?
Sorry, I know Carolyn mentioned at the outset that should there be any questions around resources, I'd be prepared to answer them. So in addition to what Eric said, weekends like this are troubling because you get this cluster of events in a short amount of time that are a drain on resources operationally and takes away our ability to do other things. And then the back end of it, the investigations are time consuming and largely complex and have their own sets of challenges. So we're confident that we've built a good model around gleaning intelligence, from a forensic standpoint, and intervening, preventing, and suppressing crime through our gang suppression teams, and then investigating specific shooting events. When we dedicate the right resources and expertise to these, we do fairly well in coming to a conclusion and holding those responsible accountable. That said, looking into the future, I think we can do better. And by better, knowing we're confident in the model we have, our intention is to scale up that model and do better with our prevention and suppression activities, do better with our investigating and bringing these to a quicker resolution. So part of our looking forward in our strategic plan will include additional resources focused on exactly what we're talking about here today. So we're just in the process of putting that together and presenting it as part of the budget process to the city.